Hello, Canada, and welcome back to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. Hope you guys are having a good Monday so far. It's literally snowing right in front of me right now, so hopefully your Monday's going better than it is up here in Kenora, where snow is still flying. Today, we've got a special episode for you guys of the Maple Pill, so I'm going to kind of set aside my normal format, and we're just going to do a deep dive because, hey, maybe you've been just kind of minding your own business over the last 2+ years of lockdowns, COVID hysteria, all kinds of different mask mandates and vaccine passports and all the other craziness that seems to be the new world order or this build back better, brave new world that they're building for us. Anyways, I imagine if you guys even dared to open mainstream Twitter or mainstream media today, you're probably punched in the face by a narrative about how dangerous the unvaccinated are to the vaccinated. Now, this narrative wasn't the narrative we were originally presented when vaccines were rolled out. This is a new narrative that's really only evolved over the last, I don't know, has it been a year, maybe a year and a half, however long the vaccines have been out. Pretty much the moment we realized the vaccines weren't a perfect vaccine, and this is actually more of a technical term, they're a leaky vaccine, meaning that, it's like the flu vaccine, right? Which is to say, it's a shot that you're going to have to get on a regular basis if you want to stay up to date with it. It's not a one and done. It's not a two and done. It's not even a three and done. It seems like it's going to be for the rest of your life if our health officials and administrators and other policy experts and wonks get their way. And so tonight, well, let's just show you some of the headlines that really triggered me and sent me down this rabbit hole because I'm in a bit of a feisty mood these days. All right, so this is from the Trial Star, but we've got a bunch of different headlines. Mixing with the unvaccinated increases COVID-19 risk for vaccinated people, study finds. Then we've got CP24 News. Mixing with unvaccinated increases COVID-19 risk for vaccinated people, study finds. We've got Toronto Sun. Mixing with the unvaccinated increases COVID-19 risk for the vaccinated, study finds. And I think we've got one more. CTV News. Being with unvaccinated people increases COVID-19 risk for those who are vaccinated. Modeling study. I gotta be honest, I'm going to give some props here to CTV News because in the era of mainstream media just pushing fear porn, at least they had the balls to say this was a modeling study rather than studying, reality and facts. We've been in this pandemic, this epidemic, if you will, for the last 2+ years. So at this point in time, we actually do have some real data that we, in theory, could use when trying to, inform public policy. And this is not the case here with this study that's being beaten over our heads in regards to what David Fisman has found in his modeling study. If that name rings a bell, it's because we've talked about him before here on the show, or maybe because you've seen him in other such popular fear porn ads. Half of the fear porn that comes out of Ontario these days around COVID-19 hysteria, right? He's one of the individuals that was on the science table here in Ontario, and he eventually stepped down because they weren't fear-mongering enough for him. And yeah, we're literally going to get to that in a second, where he said that he was predicting a terrible fall, right? It sounds like he might actually be the press secretary for Joe Biden. Remember how Joe Biden promised all the unvaccinated a winter of severe illness, if not death? Yeah, David Fisman is essentially cut from the same cloth as whoever wrote that narrative for the U.S. president. So let's start at the source here. This is David Fisman's Twitter account. I think he's actually got a couple, but I'm pretty sure this is at least one of the legit ones because it's got a blue check mark. So D. Fisman. So highlighting essentially his study from the Canadian Medical Association journal. So impact of population mixing between vaccinated and unvaccinated subpopulations on infectious diseases dynamics, implications for SARS-CoV-2 transmissions. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I actually was kind of up to the deadline in regards to putting together the show, so I might be a little bit all over the place, but stick with me. I think this one's worth the cost of admission was free, so it's definitely worth the cost of admission. So again, links to everything we're going to be referencing in the video description down below. I don't want this to be the end of your fact-finding journey. I really do just want this to be the springboard of you guys jumping on and going down your own rabbit hole of research. But just want to highlight a few points here David made in his thread, and then we're going to jump into more of the fear porn articles. Then we'll actually get to the medical study, the medical modeling study, I should say. And then finally, we're going to explore a little bit more about who David Fisman is, maybe some of his previous conflicts of interest. Maybe they're a big deal, maybe they're not a big deal. And then finally, we might poke a couple holes in the study, or at least call into questions some of his decisions when it came to modeling out this data. And you know what? Actually, even before we get into this, let's talk about why this narrative is so important and why it's so triggering for someone like me who's unvaccinated. You guys may remember back in, I think, the summer of 2021, I essentially on one of my YouTube live streams where I was hanging out with you guys, I was like, you know what? If the government's going to push it down our throats, it's going to be way too easy for me to just choose to comply, not because I believe it's best for me or it's best, regardless, but simply because it's the path of least resistance. And I know me personally, I'm definitely a path of least resistance guy. So had I just been like, you know what, let me just get the shot and get it over with, honestly, I wouldn't be paying attention to the news cycle the way I am these days. I wouldn't be as concerned about personal liberty and autonomy and all the different things we regularly discuss on this channel. And so one of the reasons this demonization, this constant attack on the unvaccinated is so important is because public policy, the health administrators, they really do not want to let go of this shiny new toy they found, this new power that's emboldened them to dictate, in a perfect world, they would dictate every aspect of our lives, or at least I'm sure the perfect world that they envision for us. And so let's first just talk about how the definition of vaccinated is evolving, right? We're already seeing, and we've highlighted this in previous episodes of the Maple Pill, that mainstream media's narrative and their experts that they regularly rely on to get the sound bites they need in order to, form the narrative that they're looking for, essentially is pushing this idea that you're no longer truly vaccinated when it comes to COVID-19 unless you've been double shotted plus a booster, right? But again, we still know that there's still waning efficacy when it comes to that booster shot as well. So presumably we're going to find ourselves on a treadmill where you're constantly going to need to get updated boosters, right? It's hard for me to not want to go down the path of cynicism and essentially say, how like planned obsolescence is an aspect in just about every aspect of consumer culture these days. Well, it feels like that's the direction we're going with medicine or healthcare as well. You just need this booster, you just need this shot, you just need this patch, and your program will work for another couple of months, and then it'll be time to update again. The same way that my iPhone seems to just lose its battery really fast, right? And again, we'll leave those conspiracy theories for other YouTubers and other shows. But the reason it's so important we understand this changing narrative and definition around vaccinated is important because right now, the way this is being framed is just about people that are vaccinated, right? Based upon this medical modeling study, not a real study, really. At least not the way it's being portrayed in a lot of mainstream media to the average person, is that eventually, if they continue to change this narrative, the same sort of logic they're using right now to attack anyone that essentially has never got a COVID shot will eventually be rolled out to everyone that doesn't have the latest patch, right? The latest update, the latest booster when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccines. And this is important because any of us that have ever looked at history, that have ever studied history to any extent, knows that oftentimes that these sort of policies are brought in as a Trojan horse, right? We're told something's temporary. We're told something's just to cover an emergency. We're told this is just needed just to get us over that hill, right? And then after that, we'll go back to normal. The government, the powers that be, will relinquish their newfound powers. And, we can pat ourselves on the back for collectively missing whatever Armageddon was on the horizon. However, when we actually look at it, whether we're talking about the war on terror, right? The war on drugs, essentially really the war in Afghanistan, any war that the government seems to be in charge of seems to just drag on indefinitely with never really a clear, finish date. And again, those of us that are maybe a little bit more anti-authoritarian are naturally going to question, maybe that's in the best interest of the statist, right? That's in the best interest of the state, is that these things drag on and never end. There's always a reason to be scared. There's always a reason to panic. There's always a reason to extend these emergency acts and emergency policies as well. And I really do think that that's the reason I guess I'm so triggered by all this shit. It's the reason that, I'm doing a weekday daily news show, is because I think that those of us that are freedom oriented, it's really easy to choose the live and let live approach, right? And that's fine and dandy when everyone else is willing to live and let live as well. But right now, there's an absolute war on your individual freedom and sovereignty. And that's what we're really going to explore in tonight's show. So let's pull back up the screen share here of David Fisman's Twitter. I'm just going to read a couple of his points, and then we'll move on from there. So, why is that not working? My Zoom button's freaking out on me. Well, fantastic. Anyways, we'll just have to manually zoom in. So looking at David Fisman's thread here, in this paper, we use a fairly simple mathematical model to explore the dynamics of infection with different levels of interaction between vaccinated and unvaccinated groups in a population. Our model varies the degree to which these groups mix in a like-with-like fashion. Ecology speak for that is assortativity. What do we find? When vaccination has been even modest effects of preventing infection, more mixing between the two groups results in protection for unvaccinated people. Vaccinated individuals serve as a buffer that slows infection spread. So again, this is something that originally was, promoted to us as a good thing. Once we get to herd immunity, and originally they threw out numbers like once 75% of adults are vaccinated, we'll be at herd immunity and everything can go back to normal. However, those of us that have lived through the last year and a half, we realize that, either the science has changed, the narrative's changed, or they just don't care anymore. Or maybe their risk assessments have evolved too. This figure from the paper shows absolute left and per capita right incidences in the two groups. And now, again, reminder, this is just a mathematical model, right? This isn't actually reality. And as we start to jump into a little bit of the assumptions behind it, it even brings more things into question, right? It really does feel like David started off with a conclusion and then decided to build a mathematical model that would justify his conclusion. Again, remember his past here, and we'll highlight some of it later on in the show, but his past has been pushing fear-mongering, right? He's been pro-lockdown from day one. Some of the conflicts of interest we're going to explore with him, again, highlight the fact that he really is pro-vaccine passports, that he is very much pro-lockdown schools, right? Shut down schools, shut down a lot of the community interaction, and definitely isolating the unvaccinated from the vaccinated. So again, this is a really long thread. We're not going to cover it all here, but I encourage you guys, spend some time, read through it all. Because I do fear that we're going to see Chrystia Freeland, who, when he had originally his conflict of interest come out, she backed him and said, thank you, David. I think that Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, and a lot of the federal government is going to use this as a justification for their current decision to extend their travel lockdowns for the unvaccinated, right? Again, you literally aren't supposed to get on a train or a plane in Canada if you're unvaccinated. And right now, that means you don't have the 2 shots. But as we discussed, odds are that will evolve over time. As we decrease interaction with the groups, as we might with vaccine passports or mandates, risk in the vaccinated goes down a lot. Risk in the unvaccinated goes up because they're deprived of the benefit of interacting with the vaccinated. Importantly, though, even as less mixing between the two groups decreases risk of vaccinated individuals, what risk they do have comes disproportionately from their contacts with the vaccinated. Which, again, I think he meant unvaccinated there in this tweet, but I didn't dive in to see whether he corrected or not. That can be seen in the bottom 2 panes of the figure above, where disproportionate contribution to risk by the unvaccinated increases over a wide range of values for reproduction number and vaccine efficacy. Okay. Shoot, this is frustrating me that my Zoom button's not working. But anyways, we'll jump back into the study in a second. But let's quickly just cover what mainstream media is portraying in regards to the study first. So this is from National News Watch, courtesy of the Canadian Press. This is a Morgan Lowry article, and this is essentially the article that everyone in mainstream media picked up this morning and is absolutely shoving down your throat. So mixing with unvaccinated increases COVID-19 risk for vaccinated people, study finds. I'm so used to my hotkeys, and when they don't work, makes for a sloppy show. The research published Monday in the Canadian Medical Association Journal found that vaccinated people who mix with those who are not vaccinated have a significantly greater chance of being infected than those who stick with people who have received the shot. In contrast, unvaccinated people's risk of contradicting COVID-19 drops when they spend time with people who are vaccinated because they serve as a buffer to transmission, according to the mathematical model used in the study. This is a direct quote from David. We thought what was missing from that conversation was what are the rights of vaccinated people to be protected from unvaccinated people, he said. And this is something we actually covered recently in last week's episode of the Maple Pill. The conclusion, he said, is that public health is something you actually have to do collectively. The researchers used a mathematical model to estimate how many infections would occur in a population depending on how much mixing occurred between vaccinated and unvaccinated people. It found that when people mixed with people of a similar vaccination status, infection rates among vaccinated people decreased from 15 to 10%, and they increased from 62 to 79% among those who were vaccinated. Again, I believe that actually is supposed to say were unvaccinated. He said the study actually underplays the importance of vaccines in one way because it doesn't take into account how they vastly cut the chances of death and hospitalization. Fisman and the results from a purely utilitarian perspective provide justification for the implementation of public health measures such as vaccine passports and vaccine mandates. However, he acknowledges that simple mathematical model doesn't fully reflect the real world of diverse factors that must be taken into account when setting public policy, including political considerations and public anger. And yeah, that's definitely an aspect of it. But in addition, there's a lot of things that are left wanting in regards to this model. You know, whether we're thinking about things like waning immunity, right? The fact that these aren't perfect vaccines, they're actually leaky vaccines. The fact that right now he's completely ignored natural immunity in the unvaccinated population as well, despite the fact that there's lots of information out there that seems to argue that natural immunity is as strong or stronger than immunity from getting the COVID shot. And it also just kind of ignores what we're actually observing in other countries, right? Again, think of Sweden, think of America, think of some of the other examples we've highlighted here in the past. But we'll go down that rabbit hole in a little bit. So again, from the Toronto Star, remaining unvaccinated increases risk to the vaccinated, says U of T COVID study. Again, this is probably the most in-depth one I saw on mainstream media because it wasn't just a copy pasta of Morgan Lowry's article, but again, it's really just highlighting some of the key points from there. Again, Toronto Sun, similar, and this was pretty much copy pasta. CTV News, again, I believe this was all just copy pasta. The article here from Global News, this is the one that David actually pushed out when he was highlighting it in his tweets. So if you want to see the coverage that he wanted you to see, definitely check out this article. But again, very similar and in line with what you're going to find in that National News Watch, courtesy of the Canadian Press. So circling back, let's just briefly talk about who David Fisman is, right? So here's his Twitter account, again, link there. Here's a Wikipedia page. So David Fisman, University of Toronto professor in the area of epidemiology at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health. He also works as an infectious disease specialist and consultant at University Health Network. Again, the vast majority of any discussion around him really is just going to be in regards to COVID-19, right? We can see the bulk of it here. It highlights some of the criticisms of him or some of the conflicts of interest that he had that arguably he didn't disclose in an appropriate time manner. So again, he's also received honorariums and advisory roles from Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and the Ontario Nurses Association related to COVID-19. Straight up, probably none of us ever heard of David Fisman until COVID-19. And like a lot of policy pundits, this has really been his claim to fame, his opportunity to shine. If you guys want to check out his bio page at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health, again, encourage you to check it out. You can see kind of the different honors and awards, current research projects, and publications he's been involved in. Now, let's go a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole here. This is from the Andy Lee Show. And again, you guys, we've talked about Andy Lee multiple times. She's doing some of the best reporting in Canada, whether it be about the Freedom Trucker Convoy, whether it be about COVID-19 and some of the crazy fear-mongering around it. Really appreciate her. Her previous Twitter account, of course, was banned for wrong think or thought crime. She used to go by Hannah Bananas on Twitter. But so highlighting here, about David Fisman. You were paid by Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and yes, even consulted for the Weed Charity Foundation. And she's just highlighting one of his disclosures in regards to where and how he's been compensated. So again, if you guys want to go down that, encourage you to do so. Here's an article from the Toronto Sun. This is back from January 26, 2021. Science table member paid by teacher union for arguing against school reopenings. So he's been a strong proponent for school lockdowns. And here's a direct quote from Doug Ford's office. When a person receives, my hotkeys. I'm such a creature of habit here. Sorry about that, guys. Here we go. So where a person receives payment for speaking, this was from the Oxford University bioethics research. Where a person receives payment for speaking on behalf of a special interest group, it would almost certainly be appropriate to declare this as a potential conflict of interest when working in roles that are even slightly related, explained Dr. Ubizuz Jemrozik from the Bioethics Research Center at Oxford University in an email to The Sun. So if you guys want to read the entire Toronto Sun article, link in the video description down below. But again, here's CBC News, because maybe some people think the Toronto Sun is a little bit too right leaning. Province slams doctor on COVID advisory table over paid work for teachers union. So Premier Doug Ford is criticizing the relationship between a member of Ontario's COVID-19 advisory science table and the province's elementary teachers union after reports surfaced of Dr. David Fisman doing paid consultancy work for the union while also advising the government on pandemic restrictions. And so he really does appear to be one of the biggest hawks on the Ontario Science Advisory tables panel. There's a lot of just gibberish there, but yeah. And essentially, then going a little bit deeper, Andy Lee also highlighted he was paid for consulting for Click Health. And what does Click do? Google is helping government and healthcare providers or authorized third parties in the U.S. to create vaccine passports on its platforms. Read more in this week's. So again, link to that. And again, the reason this is important to understand is it seems like David has primarily built his name around COVID-19, at least the name that the public, us, would be aware of him for. And it seems like he's getting a lot of consulting work via different entities that all seek to profit from the current COVID hysteria. From the Toronto Star, Dr. David Fisman resigns from Ontario's COVID-19 advisory panel. An outspoken epidemiologist on the COVID-19 science and modeling tables advising the Ontario government says the province needs a public health system that is arm's length from politics. This article honestly would be worth reading from start to finish, but we're just going to highlight the start and the finish. Ontario Science Table is promising new COVID-19 modeling next week after an outspoken member quit as he alleged grim projections on the pandemic's trajectory are being withheld for political reasons. The Science Table, a volunteer body of doctors, epidemiologists, and other experts advising Premier Doug Ford, flatly denied the accusation, saying the modeling work is not complete and that to release it prematurely would not be rigorous science. So again, David's been constantly fear-mongering from day one. This article was from August 23rd, so that's when he's around the time he stepped down. And then at the end here, in a systems, and so this is in Fisman's latest letter. So in a system such as ours, it was always going to be a challenge to balance the best scientific guidance with what's politically possible, he wrote. I find myself increasingly uncomfortable with the degree to which political considerations appear to be driving outputs from the table, or at least the degree to which these outputs are shared in a transparent manner with the public, he added. I've been uncomfortable positioned repeatedly dissenting publicly from our table guidance, though with the advantage of hindsight, I remain comfortable with my positions on the relevant issues. So again, he's been pushing kind of some of the worst case scenario modeling from day one, and he stands behind it. Now, talking about some of the disagreements he's had with fellow faculty members, and I think this is obviously a complex, nuanced discussion here, but I actually believe that David's being sincere at the bottom here when he talked about best scientific guidance with what's politically possible. I believe in David's crooked world in his in his personal view, that literally all of us should be in an individual bubble, isolating from everyone else so we can implement a zero COVID strategy, regardless of the fact that that's just never going to happen, right? Because one, we would literally need every single human, every single one of us to comply really in order to hit that sort of target, right? But what he ignores is the economic impacts, the second degree consequences, right? The unintended consequences that spill over from these sort of policies. And so we actually have another U of T professor. This one's from economics, so not health or science related, but essentially taking his disagreement. And we covered this, I think, back when it originally broke, but essentially showing the study that there's been huge economic consequences. In fact, actually, I shouldn't quote without having it pulled up here. So I'll just highlight what he points out. But I'm not your buddy. And this was a big mistake here by Ambarish Chandra, because he should have said, I'm not your buddy, pal. It would have just been a perfect South Park reference. But sure, I have a few things to say. You have consistently argued for schools to be closed with no consideration of trade-offs and no acknowledgement that the data contradicts you. Now you are actively generating hysteria around kids and scaring parents. Again, this was from January of this year, 2022. It's laughable that you accuse somebody else of being uncollegial. Was it uncollegial to institute that, or to insinuate that I and B.D. Huey, fellow U of T professors, had right-wing views for pointing out that school closures did not slow transmission? This graph of yours is not just misleading, it is straight out of How to Lie with Statistics. You selectively reduce the y-axis for kids to suggest that hospitalizations are comparable to adults. My undergraduate students know better than to do that. You predicted dire outcomes in the fall as well, scaring parents into thinking that their kids had a realistic chance of dying from attending school. Did you ever walk back your incorrect predictions? And so he screenshots here. So he came with receipts. I'm too zoomed out now. Uh, so there are about 2 million children under age 12 in Ontario, which would mean 1.4 million infections, 1,316 with severe illness, and 112 kids in critical care, and a population of 1.4 million children under 12. Using the rates from the international studies, 7 would die. Ontario schools are closed now, so this was back in January of 2022, in large part thanks to your predictions of doom. Parents have been scared into believing that schools are unsafe when they are absolutely no less safe than anywhere else in the world. If you think this is defamatory, defend your own work. And yeah, I agree with that 100%. And now let's actually jump over to the actual study. So I'm just going to pull up the abstract for now. Again, this all kind of broke today, so admittedly, I haven't spent as much time on this as I'd like, but there was a handful of things that really stood out to me. So first of all, a couple of the assumptions here seem interesting to say the least. One of the ones I've highlighted. So this is an assumption they made here. For example, a vaccine that is 80% effectuous would result in 80% of vaccinated people becoming immune, with the remaining 20% being susceptible to infection. We did not model waning immunity. So again, we literally live in a world with waning immunity. I don't think that there's anyone batshit crazy enough at this point in time to argue that there isn't waning immunity. So one, they just ignored that because they wanted a simple mathematical model, arguably so that they could just get to the conclusion they wanted. But secondly, they actually assume that it's 80% effective. So as in essentially 80% of people won't be reinfected, which we know is just horseshit at this point in time. And again, we can literally pull it up here under their figures and tables, and their own data here actually highlights that. So vaccine effectiveness. So they state the plausible range is from 0.4 to 0.8, right? So 40 to 80% is the vaccine effectiveness. And again, this is before we factor in things like waning immunity. So of course, they use the highest number there, 80%, right? So again, they literally cherry picked, and that's arguably double the lowest part of the range, right? You would think that even going with 0.6 would be a more reasonable approach. We'll meet halfway in the middle here. But no, they've got a narrative to build, and thus they need to pick the highest part of that range. And then secondly, again, this ignores any natural immunity for the unvaccinated individuals, right? I believe we covered it previously that, oh shoot, was it 25 or 50% of Canadians are predicted to have had or are stated to have had COVID-19 based upon self-reported polling. So again, take that with a giant grain of salt. But somewhere in the broad range, let's call it half of Canadians have been infected with COVID. Well, not all those were vaccinated, right? At least a portion of those are going to be unvaccinated individuals that will have some immunity, arguably the same or better immunity than those that have simply been vaccinated but haven't got COVID-19. And we've covered previous articles that, at least for a while, the narrative they were pushing was the best thing to do is get double vaccinated, boosted, plus get COVID-19 afterwards. And then, you're in the best position possible until we come out with the next booster. That last part there is, me adding a little bit of color commentary. But I wasn't the only one to notice this. So Sparrowwing1 on Twitter also highlighted. So does Table 1 really give the vaccine effectiveness range as 40 to 80%, and then just set the value at the top of the range, 80%, based on a study from fall 2021, when we have data from April 2022 that is completely different? Yeah, it seems like a reasonable question to ask there. And then there's this tweet that, arguably isn't as damning as I'm about to make it out to be, but I kind of think this is pretty fucking damning. So David Fisman, I realize politics are such that this ship may have sailed to the provincial level, but our findings are very supportive of remaining federal vaccine mandates for flights and trains. It really isn't, though, because your argument was that you need to isolate the vaccinated completely from the unvaccinated. And again, ignore a bunch of other things like waning immunity, ignore natural immunity, ignore the fact that we've got anecdotal evidence like the entire country of America, which seems to have just, at least the middle part of America, maybe there's a couple fringe parts on both the coasts, but the vast majority of America has just shrugged off COVID-19, right? We had the Super Bowl go down in America, I guess at the end of winter, early spring, and it didn't seem like that created the winter of illness and death that the White House has been predicting either. And again, I really do think that this is David trying to shoehorn in this narrative. He's been fear mongering from day one, and he'll be damned if he gives up on this because, hey, this is his claim to fame, right? This is arguably the pinnacle of his career is getting to be on that science advisory table and fear mongering to the fullest extent and getting to be the petty tyrant that we've seen where he wants schools locked down, right? He wants isolation between vaccinated and unvaccinated. Let's just go full medical apartheid, guys, right? This is how the serious people in the room talk these days. Now I want to highlight from my buddy Tommy Caldwell. He's actually running for as a member of provincial parliament here in Ontario and London. Really encourage you guys to check him out. You can find him as TC Fitness Mentor on Instagram. But I just want to highlight a couple minutes here of this Instagram video, but it's worth watching all of it. Just want to check there. Do you guys have sound? I see that Eris Moto just said that he doesn't have sound. If anyone else can let me know whether you guys had sound or not, it should be working. God damn it. Okay. This is what happens when my computer restarts right before a show. Give me 1 second to try and figure out how this works. Fuck. I'm not going to be able to figure this out. Okay. Well, shoot. Well, okay. To highlight here, Tommy Caldwell is first. He's starting off stating that, like, listen, right at this point in time, they're essentially stating that in order to participate functionally in society, you need to have these shots, right? And then he kind of segues into let's actually look at the data, right? And what he'll highlight here essentially is that, and again, this is from our. You know what? Let me just pull up the government data. So here's the COVID-19 cases by vaccination status. And what's important to highlight here is a lot of people, a lot of blue check marks, a lot of people that want the COVID hysteria to continue on indefinitely, they're constantly pushing back and saying things like, oh, well, it's not adjusted for this, that, or the other. But no, this is per capita, right? So this is rate per 100,000 and a 7-day average. And then you can actually choose based upon age category. So let's pick 18 to 39, where I fall within. Well, we can see vaccinated with booster dose cases is at what, around, as of today, we're looking at 29.41. Fully vaccinated 12.68, and not fully vaccinated cases 14.63. So as of today, based upon the data the Ontario government's making available to us, we can see vaccinated with booster is twice as likely to have COVID, right? And yeah, I really wish I had just Tommy's data here to share with you guys, but it is important to highlight this stuff. And so, again, spending a little bit of time here playing around and just look at even like deaths involving COVID-19, right? Again, if we go 18 to 39, we're not talking about something substantial when we're looking at per 100,000, right? Worst case scenario here for our not fully vaccinated deaths, we're looking at 0.04 per 100,000. And, based upon any given day, it might be zero for the others. But once we pull this out a little bit further, I guess I can only do 90 days. But again, we can see it's not that dramatic, right? And to argue that at this stage, in my opinion, that we need an all or nothing approach to public policy is just asinine. Again, Tommy does a much better job. He's much more nuanced and factual oriented. But what I really want to highlight here, guys, is that this is the narrative that our mainstream media, as well as our public health policy experts, they're all pushing towards this. And where I see this going under a worst case scenario is they use this as well as other studies. And again, this is a mathematical model, not a study based upon reality, right? Because it ignores so many fundamental things that I don't know. I just can't really take it that seriously. Now, again, there's certain basic ideas that are presented that make some sense, right? Like herd immunity is a thing we've discussed in the past. And so certainly if you were to take all the unvaccinated and force them to only interact with each other, then yeah, you would expect there to be some consequences to that, right? Versus a fully dispersed. But the same way that if we were to take vaccinated or unvaccinated individuals that have had COVID and force them to isolate amongst themselves, and those that have never had COVID and isolate amongst themselves, again, there'd be consequences to that. So, what this all boils down to is the trade offs, right? What level of protection do you have from your fellow citizens? And the argument right now that we're seeing pushed seriously amongst Canadian health officials and public policy pundits is this idea that we need to have absolute safety, and so there is no sacrifice too great that's not justifiable based upon the goal of zero COVID deaths, of those sort of approaches, which are just impossible. This, like, Pandora is out of the box. It's not going back in at this moment in time. But yet they would love to see us enacting similar policies to what we see right now going on in Shanghai. And one of the ways you can know that mainstream media is okay with what's going on in Shanghai right now is the fact that they give way more coverage every single day to hundreds of different stories, right? And we covered this once. There was one day in mainstream media where I think it was two different mainstream media Canadian news outlets actually had articles that you could find on the front page of their website that actually talked about what was going on in Shanghai and China with their lockdowns, and yet didn't use any of the source materials, any photos, didn't use any of the videos being shown, and didn't talk about some of the worst abuses that we've actually seen coming out of China. And so my greatest fear here is that we're going to wake up in a world where this is just normalized. And this is going to, like, if this is normalized, we're going to find ourselves far beyond the slippery slope. It's just going to be a sheer fucking drop at that moment in time. And what that drop is going to be is into complete medical tyranny, right? The idea of like vaccine passports, well, very quickly that becomes your social score, right? Your government ID. All that gets integrated into one thing. And again, once you pair that with things like a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, all of a sudden it's very easy to see how the government can, 10x or 100x or hell, 1,000x their carrot and sticks when it comes to incentivizing and disincentivizing behavior they don't like from their average citizen. And that's the brave new world that guys like David Fisman want us to actually find ourselves in. And just hard no. I've got no interest in living in that world, and you guys shouldn't either. But I can't help but feel like we're not at a serious inflection point, right? It feels to a certain extent like we're just on the cusp of getting a bunch of our freedoms back. And yet, again, we've seen the federal government said they're following the data and the science, and they're not ready to let us go back to normal. And we're seeing the same thing being pushed by mainstream media by the fact that they jump all over this mathematical modeling without calling into question any of its assumptions, right? And this is immediately a justification for demonizing the unvaccinated further. And honestly, in this world of headline reading individuals, most people are going to probably not even read the headline. They're going to have someone else tell them the headline, right? They're going to have one news reporter on mainstream media regurgitate a couple of statements from David Fisman, and that's that. That's going to be used as the smoking gun to justify continued lockdowns or to justify even an increase in public policy around lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine passports, and all the craziness that has been the last 2 years. I'm fucking done with that shit. And you guys should be too. And I encourage you, go watch Tommy Caldwell's video. Link in the video description down below. It's about 20 minutes. I think all 20 minutes are worth listening to. And I'm very frustrated with myself that I didn't do an audio check first. But, say la vie, such is life. But I appreciate you guys making this a two-way conversation. Saw a bunch of people jumping in the comment section. We're going quickly go through the comments. If you guys have your hot take on this, let me know in the comment section right now. And that'll be it for today's episode. Today is Monday, so usually it would be a Monday mailbag, Matt McKeever hangout. But one, I didn't receive any mail. That's on you guys. And two, I ended up just having a lot of my time absorbed by this story and this article. And I think this was important. If you guys think it's important, please consider smashing that like button, hit subscribe, and sharing really is caring, because this video's got all the bad words in it from a YouTube algorithm perspective, so it is going to drop off a fucking cliff as far as viewership goes. Not that I get a lot of views in the first place, but yeah. So we've got Nathan in the chat. The ongoing demonization of people choosing not to get this dodgy vaccine is exhausting. I just returned to Canada after being in the UK for 6 months. I was told to quarantine 14 days because science. Yes, but if you were vaccinated, you wouldn't have to quarantine, right? Or is it 3 days? Honestly, they changed the rules so much now, it's hard for me to keep track. But yes, absolutely, Nathan. Glad to hear you made back to Canada. Not glad to hear you have to isolate for 14 days. We've got Ryan in the chat. What's up, Ryan? We've got Hungarian Experiment. This country and its leaders have lost its mind. Yes, I agree. And honestly, there was so much we could cover today, right? There was an article that came out today talking about how the RCMP considered actually charging Justin Trudeau over his Aga Khan scandal, right? We covered it briefly when we did a highlight of a bunch of Trudeau scandals in a previous episode. Declan, Karen, 2 doses of the vaccine offers very limited protection, if any. 3 doses with a booster offer reasonable protection against hospitalization and death. Pfizer CEO, January 10th. Again, that'll be updated in the near future, in my opinion. My issue with the vax thing is how it's not really a choice. It's coercion, blackmail. 100% agree with you, Terry. Honestly, I never had an issue with a vaccine until this one, because it was rolled out so quickly and it was such a binary thing, right? It was like, you have to get it. And it was like, I don't think I've ever got the flu shot. Maybe I got it in grade school when they used to like come around and give it to everyone. I think they did that. But yeah, since then, never got it. And I don't think that I should be coerced to it, right? And again, understanding the risks and rewards of this for at-risk individuals, for those over the age of 65, the morbidly obese, those with pre-existing health conditions, yeah, COVID-19 appears to be no joke. But if we're talking about children, COVID-19 arguably is a joke compared to the flu, which is far more dangerous to them. Bite Hunter, I refuse to be vaccinated. Anyone trying to vaccinate me is going to get kicked in their ding-dongs and their vajayjays. Appreciate the perspective. We got P58 in the chat. Free faster. The coercion caused me to lose a lot of faith in the government. I've gone from somewhat distrusting to extremely distrusting as a result of the past 2 years. Yeah, I completely agree with you, Free Faster. It just, I was always libertarian at heart, but I would argue I was like a pragmatist, or just like, yeah, it's not too bad. I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm just going to do me. And the last 2 years have really called into question one, whether that was smart for me to approach life that way, and two, whether that's the life I actually want to live, right? Which was just like, the classic meme, like hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. No, we shouldn't just be turning a blind eye to all this. And that's why I think shows like this are important. That's why I appreciate those of you that are commenting on videos like this, because again, a lot of people are just going to be like, honestly, like the biggest criticism to a video like this is going to be like, well, you're not a scientist. You're not a professor at U of T. You're not this, that, or the other. It's like, no, but like, I'm not claiming to have like firsthand research here. I'm literally just regurgitating and aggregating the facts as they've been stated, right? And, compared to most of my shit, I don't even think there's anything controversial I've brought up here. These are all mainstream media news outlets that we're referencing, right? I just that we find ourselves in such a polarized world in such a short period of time. And I've mentioned to you guys in the past, but I'm right now reading Bloodlands, which is about the atrocities that both Russia and Germany committed against Eastern Europe, and particularly the Ukraine, from the 1930s and the 1940s. And it's wild to hear how the Stalinists, the communists, implemented the Holodomor, right? Like the fast or like the famine that killed millions of Ukrainians. Honestly, we don't even know really how many, but 3 million, more than 3 million, through starvation. And honestly, so many of the policies, they knew going in what they were doing was wrong and there was consequences, but they truly believed, at least according to this book and other books I've read and listened to on the subject matter, they believed that on the other side of this cost was some sort of utopian society, right? Some sort of Marxist idealist society. And that's where we get into this dangerous quagmire of the ends justifies the means. And for a lot of our health administrators and those that create public policy, I think that they live in that world where if they have a ends in mind, they can justify any means that gets them to that ends. And that's why we find ourselves in this clown world where, our only like neighbor with a land border, America, can host the Super Bowl with tens of thousands of people, squished into a stadium, all chanting and screaming and breathing on each other. And there's appears to be no consequences and, no real detrimental effects to society. We didn't see, was it hosted? I forget where it was hosted. Was it hosted in LA? We didn't see LA collapse. And yet here in Canada, we can't dare allow an unvaccinated person onto a train or an airplane. And we're going to try and make it as difficult as possible for them to leave the country. This isn't the policy of a sane administration. Free faster. Once 75% of the eligible population are vaccinated, we will change the clown science. Yeah, I wish they would have told us that from day one, because this is wild. We've got Nish in the chat. What's up, Nish? Good to see you. Unvaccinated and proud. And it's funny you highlight the UN there in the unvaccinated, Peter, because I noticed in David Fisman's tweets, every single tweet, like he emphasizes capital U, capital N, which I think he probably views as derogatory. But I'm just like, no, you know what? I'm more than comfortable with my position in life. And this idea that they're trying to demonize personal medical choices, right? I would much rather them focus on actually educating and, ideally they would educate with pure motives behind it and just want to be like, hey, here's all the facts, make your own decision. But instead, they choose to demonize and try and punish any individual that goes against the mainstream narrative. And I think that this probably would have worked 100 years ago. It doesn't work in the internet age, thankfully. But again, Canada's going to try their darndest to essentially outlaw the internet or any free speech on the internet. Terry, my only issue with the vax is how pharmaceutical companies are greatly benefiting off government cash, which I'm sure is part of the blame for illogical mandates. Yeah, we've done a deep dive previously on how much has COVID-19 cost Canada, and it's a shit ton, right? It costs us a shit ton in just expired vaccines, right? We're literally throwing out millions of vaccines, which is millions of dollars. Yeah, we live in the clown timeline. Appreciate everyone jumping in, sharing their support. I caught COVID about 2 weeks ago, and it was like a little worse than a mild cold for me. Now I feel better than after. She's been crushing it. Oh, did I miss something here? I think you're talking about your mom, right? I feel better than after. She been crushing it in the gym the last week. Uh, Appreciate you sharing that, HE. Did you see NDP's Ontario platform? They make BC NDP look like amateurs. I trust that we're not going to wake up in a world where I need to care about the NDP's Ontario platform. So fingers crossed, Aries, that I can just be blissfully ignorant about that, because there's so many other things that already boil my blood these days. Yeah, clown science is right. It changes constantly. Here now. Anyone else think this whole snake venom thing is a big distraction from something else? Well, and honestly, I think there's a real discussion to be had here about, where do you draw the line with your conspiracy theories? And, one of the funny things is CTV News had an article come out recently, right, where the headline was, conspiracy theorists keep getting things right. Why this is a bad thing. And honestly, it is bad, because it makes me suspicious of just about every fucking thing now these days, where like, I don't like when someone's like, oh, like, let's even talk about like Twitter and Elon Musk, right? I just want to take it at surface level and think that Elon Musk is going to be a net benefit for free speech. But my experience over the last 2 years makes me literally suspicious of everyone, including myself. And that's not good, right? We've discussed this in the past, but I really do love Matt Ridley's book, The Rational Optimist, which talks about high trust societies. We thrive, humans thrive in high trust societies. And right now, I believe that our governments over the last 2 years have done more to cause a collapse in faith of existing institutions and organizations, and particularly the political class, than anything else that we've experienced, at least in my living memory, right? Like this COVID hysteria makes 9/11 look like a joke, makes the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq look like a joke. Honestly, it like the weapons of mass destruction narrative, right? All that jazz, like that almost seems more reasonable to me these days than the COVID-19 hysteria. Which again makes me want to question everything. So I hear you on that here now. Peter says, didn't know anyone who actually caught COVID until about 5 to 6 months ago. Now almost everyone I know has caught it, and none have had serious negative long-term effects. Yeah, anecdotally speaking, I don't know a single person that's died of COVID-19. Now, again, I also just don't know a lot of super old people. So that's probably part of the problem. Also, it just seems like a lot of the young people I know are healthy. They're into fitness. I mean, I need to step up my game. I'm usually one of the least healthy people in the group of people I hang out with. So, if anything, I'm probably one of the greatest risk factors. But yeah, I personally haven't been impacted. Like policies have impacted me greatly with COVID-19. Right, businesses have had to pivot. Sold businesses, exited opportunities and things like that. Haven't partaken in certain opportunities where I could go to the US and stuff like that, because it seems like it's a real fucking hassle being unvaccinated and trying to get to the US. And all this is just too much at this point in time. Graham says all the symptoms. I'm not sure what that means. P58, unvaxxed, infected by vax 5 weeks ago and survived in scale 1 to 5. I give it 2.5. I survived some hangovers in my young days, which were way worse. I'm sure most of us have actually, put ourselves in worse positions than what a lot of people have experienced with COVID-19 through just a lack of moderation when it comes to alcohol. Terry, the virus has mutated to the point where it's no longer the same as the original strains, same as trying to keep up with the flu. Yeah, and I believe if you actually look at the data that David Fisman uses in his modeling there, it's actually using data that was pre-Omicron, right? So he was pulling data from 2021 pre-Omicron. And again, that's how he comes to his conclusions, not looking at like facts on the ground where we are at this moment in time. And that to me, again, just makes me so much more suspicious of everything. Basmatic, pretty much standard to go through a bad flu once per year. Nothing has changed. Mike Pixel, I had COVID before I got vax, was 3-day flu, not that bad at all. Terry, if I was old or immunocompromised, I would be worried about C19 or any flu for that matter. I personally haven't been sick since 2019. We'll keep the streak alive there. Organic Experiment is saying cancel David Fisman. Sorry about that sound issue, guys. I'll have to make sure I get that reset up for the next live stream tomorrow. But yeah, appreciate everyone jumping in there. Got a couple more comments here, and then we'll wrap it up. We've got Tara. Interesting that your school masking article you read from the book called How to Lie with Statistics, which was actually on Bill Gates' summer reading list. Yeah, I've actually read the book too, right? How to Lie. Is it exactly How to Lie with Statistics? But anyways, yeah, I've read most of the books that Bill Gates recommends because I do find them to be interesting reads. But there is a handful of interesting books that explore statistics and our interpretation of statistics and how we can often find ourselves coming to the wrong conclusions. And usually that's based upon our original biases. I recommend people look at what Psycho Billy advertises on his reading list because it predicts the next game they're going to play. Appreciate you sharing your perspective there, Tara. Only the fully vaxxed are allowed to hear it. That's funny for you, Vaster. Hey, Matt, it seems enough now that these non-elected idiots want to control every aspect of our lives, but now the WHO will be hosting its annual meeting attended by delegates from 192 nations, which members will be voting on the 13 amendments that will hand over additional sovereignty, control, and legal authority to the World Health Organization. Yeah, we covered this briefly. I believe Kian Baxter from the Counter Signal had a great write-up on his website, so I encourage you guys jump over to the Counter Signal, where he kind of explores how essentially if the WHO has their way, individual countries will be giving up more and more control of their country to these global institutions like the World Health Organization. If I remember correctly, the one proposal essentially would allow economic sanctions to be placed against individual countries that went against the WHO's desire. Sandra Roger Stone. Yeah, I honestly didn't have a time to even look at that, but I did hear that because that's I can picture his face right now. But Derek Sloan's party, right? The Ontario party. Unfiltered fake news. Unvaxxed now means one dose or less. As of today, there are a total of 300 people unvaccinated in hospitals for C19. There are 1,200 fully vaxxed. Appreciate you sharing that. Oh, in Ontario. Hello, Matt. Hey, everyone. What's up, Kahana? Sean, how do you feel about Elon Musk buying Twitter today? Well, we actually accidentally sort of covered that. What are your thoughts on CRA scammers who are arrested in Brampton linked to stealing 10 million from Canadian citizens are now released with all charges dropped? Ooh, I didn't actually see that. If you could share a link with me on social media there, Sean, or in my Problems for Profits Discord, I would happily go down that rabbit hole. I haven't came across it, so can't say. Although, personally, I don't imagine Jag Meat's involved in it. Matt just said he wants to get into fitness, need the biceps. All right, Mike, you can continue to focus on that. Aislinn, that CTV headline about conspiracy theorists getting everything right was a meme created by Ferryman's Toll. His memes are really well done. Oh, was it? Okay. Graham, question everything. The soil feels fertile to have long accepted falsehoods revealed as the lies they are. Suggest starting with germ theory versus terrain theory. The rabbit hole is deep. My first comment was completely shadow banned by YouTube. Boo. Oh, yeah, I didn't see your first comment. Night, Matt, some great perspective there. Suspicion is the word. Great show. All right. Well, appreciate everyone hanging out with me on Monday night. I know there's a lot of things competing for your time and attention. So the fact you'd spend it with me, despite the fact I had some technical errors tonight, means a lot to me. So again, really do appreciate you guys. If you want more Matt McKeever in your life, you can follow me on Instagram, Matt McKeever Unfiltered on IG. And yeah, that's it for tonight's episode. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll probably come back with a full dose of the maple pill, but I just thought this story was worth spending some time on. So hopefully you guys do more research, dive further down that rabbit hole. But I see so many people, tonight or this weekend over family dinner having a conversation, and a loved one's going to bring up this about, how they should start disinviting unvaccinated individuals. We actually covered it last week in one of those Toronto Sun, where it was an Ask Amy, and they're like, do I have to tell someone I'm unvaccinated? No, you absolutely do not have to tell someone you're unvaccinated. Although I think you should honestly wear like a badge of honor at this point in time, because it kind of feels like a critical thinking exercise at least some of the time these days. And I'm happy to be surrounded with a fellow critical thinker. So anyways, I'll stop rambling here. We'll wrap up. Again, links to everything in the video description down below. I'll see you guys tomorrow.